Continuing what I started with my last two videos, I'm doing another season preview for today's upload. Today I was in the mood for doing the Bucks season outlook, and like how I did with the Sixers and the Kings, I'm going to start the season preview by doing a season review of what happened last year. Of course, this season was marked by them trading for Dame starting late last offseason, which had many people crowning them as the favorite out of the East. Now, with Giannis being injured in the playoffs, they didn't really stand a chance. But even besides that, there were many that were cautious on how this Dame trade was going to work out last offseason. Not because they didn't think Dame and Giannis could be the best duo in the league, but because their perimeter defense was going to take a sharp blow for having to trade away Grayson Allen and Jrue Holiday. I was personally satisfied when they traded away Jrue because Jrue was never going to offensively rise up to the level they were asking him to be at. But at the same time, I knew how important he was defensively to them. So I was cautious, and I was counting on them to make some type of play at the trade deadline to bolster the perimeter defense, but it never really happened. And these worries ended up proving true over the course of the season, and I also pointed out after the Pacers beat them in the NBA Cup that their offense was looking clunky as well. But looking at what happened to them last season, there were some disastrous factors I should mention before I bring up what was wrong with their roster. Firstly, Dame was self-admittedly not in shape after being traded so late into the offseason. He also was dealing with a divorce in his personal life as well. They had a coaching disaster with rookie coach Adrian Griffin, where he lost the locker room and was fired despite them being the 2 seed. Then they got Doc Rivers and they go under 500 and luckily only fall to the 3 seed, but then Giannis gets injured at the end of the season and the Pacers make easy work of them in the first round. So roster aside, this was a very unfortunate season for Milwaukee, along with it being year 1 of Dame anyway. Despite those obstacles, the majority of people are writing this roster off this year, but there are some people that strongly believe in the potential of Giannis and Lillard as a duo. I am personally not one of those people, and I can explain why pretty easily. Like I mentioned earlier, their perimeter defense was abysmal last year, and they did little to address that this year. Last year, they had people like Dame, old Patrick Beverley, old Jay Crowder, Pat Connaughton, and Malik Beasley protecting their perimeter. This year, it's going to be the same story except swap out Pat Bev and Crowder for Taurean Prince and Gary Trent Jr. Their defensive rating was 19th last year, despite them having both Brook Lopez and Giannis protecting their rim. This year, we should see more of the same, and it will likely be the death of them in the playoffs. We saw teams like the Sixers against the Knicks and the Mavericks against the Celtics have their defenses be forced to collapse on a regular basis in those series due to them having too many weak links on their perimeter. Even if you want to counter that with saying that Giannis and Dame will carry, I'm not personally buying that either. Firstly, Dame is going to be 34 this year, and small, shifty guards that are reliant on their speed on offense often fall off pretty hard at this age, especially when they're score-first point guards. Kemba Walker would be a recent extreme example of this. And I'm not saying I expect that, but there is cause for concern at this age, as we have seen this with Harden, for example. When he first got to Philadelphia, a lot of people were saying that he was still recovering from his hamstring injury, and he was going to get back in shape, but it ended up never happening. Dame was looking a step slower last year regardless of his conditioning, but I will say he turned it up in the playoffs just like how he used to. Even if he has a down regular season, one of the Bucks' X factors will be if playoff Dame is still going to be able to be tapped into. As for their other star, Giannis is not good enough to automatically give them a shot like some people are saying. This is no fault to Giannis, as I hold this belief for every superstar in the league. They all need a complementary co-star and the right supporting cast to get them over the hump. You can look at the rosters of every championship team in recent memory to understand that, but even just looking at Giannis's recent history, we know that he's not a one-man army and in fact can be schemed against pretty well. We saw in 2019 the Raptors built a wall to defend him, and his team wasn't able to shoot out of it. We saw in 2020 and 2023 they were severely outcoached and collapsed against the Heat. And then in 2021 they won it all, and in 2022 and 2024 they had key injuries that they could not realistically overcome. So saying Giannis automatically gives you a shot at the ship is not accurate, even if you limit your research to the Bucks' playoff history only. The last thing I'll bring up before addressing the nail in the coffin for this team is that Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez are getting pretty old. Brook Lopez is going to be 36 this season, and he already regressed both offensively and defensively last season. If you look at Chris's stats or give him the eye test, he has not been the same in the past 2 seasons, mainly due to his knee injuries. I will say he did show up in the playoffs over the last few years, so the legend of playoff Chris may still live. But in the regular season, I don't know if he can return to that fringe all-star level again. Should he be able to finally fix his knees this season, I do think age would treat him better than Dame, though. So to wrap up their roster review, this is what I'm seeing. They have an MVP level player in Giannis, an all-star in Dame, and a fringe all-star at best with Middleton. They have 4 solid players like Brook Lopez, Pat Connaughton, Taurean Prince, and Bobby Portis. But in terms of getting their 8th and 9th player in their playoff rotation, it's looking pretty rough unless one of their young players makes a big leap. But even if they get to an 8th and 9th player they could trust in the playoffs, their perimeter defense has no shot at being good, and their rim protection has been steadily regressing, with Giannis and Brook Lopez regressing as defensive presences. You also don't have someone like Drew or a younger Chris Middleton to be your first option on perimeter defense. This roster also has a very old core that should show regression going into the season with that many age factors being present. The Bucks front office is also in a tough spot to address these issues at the deadline, considering that they are over the second apron. And last but not least, this team also has Doc Rivers as their head coach. I've been holding on to that this entire video because I wanted to give this team a fair shot, but Doc Rivers is going to make all these flaws crystal clear come playoff time, just like he did with the Sixers in the previous 2 years. We've seen the Bucks underperform in the playoffs with Bud, with a better roster in years past, so what do we think Doc with a worse roster can realistically cook up? Even if age does not play a factor this season for this team, Doc will 100% be holding this roster back. And again, while they do have some fine pieces, I seriously doubt they're going to have a championship level defense, and they have too many age factors for their core for my liking. I know Dame and Giannis as a duo is very exciting, but even if Dame activates Dame time in the playoffs, their defense is not containing any of the other contenders, which is very reminiscent of Dame's time in Portland. Another team that this kind of reminds me of is the Suns after they traded for KD and signed Bradley Beal. At first, everyone could only see how good that big three was on paper, but now the consensus is that their team can't play defense and isn't deep enough regardless after gutting their team for those 2 players. So for me personally, I can't put them as a top contender in the East, and I do think they have less potential than several other Eastern contenders as well due to their defensive deficiencies and their shitty coach. I personally expect them to lose in the second round to one of the East heavyweights, and best case scenario, they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. But we'll see how things end up playing out for them. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos in the future. Comment if you have something to say. And thank y'all for watching. I guess I'll see y'all next time.